Good afternoon, everyone. I am Ari Berman, voting rights reporter for Mother Jones. Thank you for tuning in to this very timely conversation with former Attorney General Eric Holder. This is streaming on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, so you can get it all over social media. And I am really thrilled to be joined again by former Attorney General Eric Holder. I'm sure he needs no introduction, but in case you'd forgotten, he was the 82nd Attorney General of the United States, the first African-American Attorney General, the third longest serving Attorney General, and he has done a lot of things since then, but most notably, he is chairman of the National Democratic Redistricting Committee, which works to combat gerrymandering and elect Democrats who will fight for fair maps. I wrote about Attorney General Holder's work in the July-August 2019 issue of Mother Jones, titled "The Courts Won't End Gerrymandering. Eric Holder has a plan to fix it without them." Mr. Attorney General, good to see you.
It's good to see you too, Ari. I think we've done so many things. I think in addition to all the other titles I had, I think I'm actually a Mother Jones correspondent now. So
you are senior justice advisor for Mother right. Jones.
That's fair. That's fair.
So how are you doing? How are you coping with everything going on in the world right now?
Just like everybody else. I mean, I'm trying to, adapt to the pandemic, still doing all the responsible things, mask wearing, socially distancing, but kind of missing, my life. NBA was good to watch. NFL is good to watch. And then obviously dealing with, all the issues that surround the upcoming election and getting ready for, who knows what in that regard.
So I should say, I have a ton of questions for you. I'm sure the audience is going to have a ton of questions for you as well. So for all the people watching, if you want to ask a question, drop it in the chat and we will try to get to it later. So first off, I'm just curious, Mr. AG, as you were watching the debate last night, what did you think?
It seemed to me it was like more of the same in the sense that Pence, talked over Kamala, talked over Susan Page. He did it in perhaps a nicer way than Trump did during his debate. But these Republican males just don't seem to get the message that, people want to see two people interacting, not one trying to dominate the other. And I think it betrayed in both the debates a lot of weakness, both in terms of their positions and their views for the future of the country. And I thought both were clear wins, first for Joe Biden and then yesterday for Kamala Harris.
What do you think about Donald Trump saying he won't do a virtual debate with Joe Biden?
Well, he is, thank God he's in the process of recovering, but all the doctors say that he is still infectious. And the notion that you would have another debate while he was still infectious. And remember, this is a town hall debate. So you would be having, average citizens there and potentially being put at risk by, his ongoing disease or his ongoing infectious capability makes no sense. And so just like we've adapted, we've adapted here, we're doing something virtually. You can do debates virtually. And I don't see any reason why it couldn't proceed, in that manner.
So you're a former attorney general. So I want to ask you about the current attorney general who is in the news a lot. Bill Barr is spreading a lot of lies about voter fraud. He is leading politically motivated investigations that seem to be benefiting the president. How big of a danger to democracy do you think Attorney General Barr's actions are?
Yeah, I think what he's doing at the Justice Department gives me, great concerns. Starting investigations, I think, without the basis of a good predicate, the thing that John Durham is now heading up, reporting on investigations or leaking information about investigations as they are in the process of proceeding. It's something you never do at the Justice Department, interjecting himself into cases that have, if his interjection has, is favorable to the president. That's of great concern. And then, go back a litany of things. How he mischaracterized the Mueller report. I don't think, somebody was asking me, I guess, the other day, has he politicized, the Justice Department? And my response was, no, he has weaponized the Justice Department. He's using the department as a political tool, as an arm of the White House, as an arm of the Trump campaign. And that's inconsistent with the way in which AGs and Justice Departments conduct themselves. And I want to make people understand this. Inconsistent with the way in which Republican as well as Democratic AGs have conducted the Justice Department in the past. I mean, I didn't go to even the conventions when I was Attorney General, put out memos about making sure that we didn't do anything in the run up to an investigation, run up to an election that might somehow have a negative impact on it. And apparently they've now put an exception to that memo. He's a pretty worrisome character.
I wanted to ask you about exactly one thing you just raised, the reporting yesterday that Justice Department officials, local prosecutors could announce quote unquote voter fraud investigations right before an election, which previously you couldn't do. Is that the example of the kind of weaponization of DOJ that we're seeing? And what's the concern about how that could affect a free and fair election?
I mean, that's exactly what I'm talking about. That is just inconsistent with the traditions of the Department of Justice under Republican as well as Democratic attorneys general. The notion that you're going to reveal to the public an election law investigation right before the election, no one has ever done anything like that. No one has ever done anything like that. And why would you want to reveal that? Only, it seems to me, to try to influence the election, maybe somehow give credence to the things that he has says that he's admitted that he has no empirical evidence for. When he says that foreign powers could come in and overcome or put a lot of fake ballots into our mail system. Then when he's asked, well, do you have any proof of that? Well, no, but it's logical. Well, no, it's not logical. And so, doing this when you're in the process, potentially running up to an election and then potentially saying that, well, we've got this investigation into an election law matter, doesn't mean at that point the Justice Department has decided there's a violation of the law. I mean, you're just talking about an investigation that may ultimately result in no charges. So that's why you don't go, the department only speaks potentially when it opens an investigation sometimes, but really only when an indictment is returned. And so this is, again, inconsistent with the traditions of the department, but totally consistent with Barr's involvement of the department into the political component of this election.
Do you think that Barr should resign or be impeached?
I think that Democrats need to win the election in November. We need to have Joe Biden as president, and he needs to put a new attorney general in come January the 21st of next year.
What's your reaction to Trump saying on Twitter that Barr needs to, quote unquote, arrest somebody, and specifically former President Obama, Hillary Clinton, and Joe Biden for a, quote unquote, coup against him?
I mean, you would say that that's absurd. It's ridiculous. But you wonder, well, how far is Barr, willing to go? I don't think he's going to arrest any of those people, but will he try to do things to somehow satisfy the president whose directions he follows? That gives me concern. Attorneys general have huge amounts of power, and it can't be used in a political way, which is why there has to be a sense of independence between the Justice Department and the White House, between the Attorney General and the President. And Barr does not see, apparently, the need for that.
Did President Obama ever ask you to arrest one of his political opponents?
No. President Obama never asked me to arrest anybody, to open an investigation on anybody, to do anything. In fact, I thought that the White House that we had was really more gun shy than they needed to be in interacting with the Justice Department. I think part of that was because of the experience that the Justice Department had under George W. Bush, and so there were some pretty high walls between the Justice Department and the White House.
What should people do to try to hold the Attorney General accountable? What are you hearing from career folks inside the department? Should they speak out? Should they resign? What can people do to fight back against this?
It's a tough question, because I've seen now two prosecutors who have sent letters I guess, to their local newspapers, indicating that they are concerned about the direction of the department. And I certainly applaud them. Those are courageous acts. These people are these are career people, and they just want to do their jobs. They want to stay in the department. They like what they do. They like the way in which they have the ability to serve the public from the department. So that's kind of tough. I would urge, though, people in the department, not to compromise their principles, not to compromise their values, and do things that they know are inconsistent with the ways in which the Justice Department is supposed to conduct itself. Do things that are inconsistent with the oaths that they took when they joined the department. So, I would urge everybody to just, to hold on, stay true to their values. And as I said, I hope that when come January, we'll have a new Attorney General, we'll have a new leadership cadre at the Department of Justice, and things can get back to normal.
How concerned are you about President Trump not committing to accepting a peaceful transfer of power?
I think at the end of the day, the American people are going to be the ones who decide this election and decide who will lead the nation after January the 20th. I think we have to be prepared for, all the possibilities, but I really do think that, we've had elections in the pandemic of, 1918. We've had elections during World Wars. We've had elections during, the Civil War. And so I think there have been a lot of impediments, a lot of issues around having the people get to the polls and having an election that ultimately resulted in, the peaceful transfer of power. And I think that's where we're going to end up here. Doesn't mean we shouldn't prepare for all kinds of possibilities, but I actually think that the result will be one that even if Donald Trump decides that he doesn't want to respect the will of the people, all of the mechanisms that he would need to mobilize to somehow stay in office will not support him.
What are you and other Democrats doing to prepare for post-election litigation over the counting of ballots?
Well, we're trying to anticipate all the negative things and unprecedented things that we might have to deal with. And so, the campaign made an announcement that we got a couple of former solicitors general. I'm involved in the effort as well to try to anticipate problems that might arise as a result of actions that the Republicans or the Trump campaign might take. And so there are lawyers, all around the country who are prepared to get into court if that's necessary, and to challenge actions that are inconsistent with state electoral laws, federal electoral laws. And then I think, just as importantly, inconsistent with the way in which we have always conducted elections and the way in which we have given respect to the will of the people.
Do you have specific voter suppression tactics you're concerned about? Are you concerned about everything? Are you concerned about specific things? What are your biggest concerns as it relates to the ability to have a free and fair election?
Well, there are the things that, unfortunately, I think we have become accustomed to, and we shouldn't. I'm concerned about these use of unnecessary photo IDs. That has a depressive effect on the electorate. I'm concerned about the problems that we're probably going to have with regard to the Postal Service and what that means for mail-in ballots. Concerned about the way in which they're going to have these poll workers. Supposedly, I think they call it Trump's army or something like that. These people are supposed to be observers, 50,000 of them, something like that. What are they actually going to be doing? Although, to be fair, I guess I've seen bits and pieces of a video that they've sent out that seems to indicate that they're going to conduct themselves in an appropriate way. So there's a whole range of things that that give me concern.
About the poll workers, the poll watchers that Republicans are recruiting, what should people know about that? Because I think one of the things the president's trying to do is intimidate people from voting just by talking about the fact that he's going to recruit all of these poll watchers. So what should people know about their rights if they're in line to vote and someone approaches them and tries to dissuade them from voting?
Well, if you're in line and waiting to vote, there's nobody who can come up to you and challenge you or try to dissuade you from voting. Poll watchers have a very limited role that they can play, and that is at the polls. They're supposed to watch the polls, not lines to try to get to the polls. And then, state law dictates what is it they can do in challenging voters and things like that. So, it's again, if they act in an appropriate way, they don't worry me an awful lot. But in the situation that you just outlined, if they're actually going in talking to people who are waiting in line, that's something that you should first, try to ignore. And to the extent that it becomes something that is of concern to you, raise that with people who are actually supervising the polls and point out who that person is. If you've got an iPhone or something like that, take that out and try to document that which they are trying to do. I mean, we don't have to be, passive in this. I mean, people are trying to take away from us, or potentially trying to take away from us, that which is our most sacred right. And so we need to be in a position to fight back, push back. Don't simply, accept what somebody is telling you about what you can and can't do. If you think that it seems inconsistent with the way things have always been done in the past, well, say so. Push back. Don't simply take and follow directions from people who might not have the best motives.
I'm sure you saw the news today of indictments against white supremacist terrorist organizations trying to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan. How concerned are you, broadly speaking, about white supremacist terrorist violence in this country? And how concerned are you that it could happen on Election Day or after Election Day if they're encouraged by the president?
Well, I don't know about any specific threats. I'm pretty confident that the FBI and working with their state and local partners probably got a pretty good handle on this. I mean, I can say that when we would start the our review of the daily intelligence, that's at 8:30 every morning, I'd go to the FBI and we'd go through the raw intelligence for the past 24 hours. Over the course of my time, that 6 years as AG, a larger and larger component of that brief dealt with domestic terror groups. And I think, as Director Wray said, that's one of, if not the biggest threat that we now have to confront as a nation. Threats from overseas are still ones that we have to be concerned about, but we really need to focus on what's going on inside the country and then try to neutralize it. And I would hope that this would be something that Republicans, as well as Democrats, liberals, as well as conservatives, could unite behind and try to make sure that people who are going to use violent means to try to impose their minority views would be held accountable and would be ultimately prosecuted.
What more do you think can be done to stop the spread of white supremacist terrorism? Because this is something that's increased significantly during the Trump administration.
Well, I mean, I think, we certainly have to make sure that, the tone that in which we discuss the differences that we have is done in a more civil way. There needs to be a greater sense of unity among the American people, so that these people are not seen as, integral to the efforts of one party or the other, but are seen as what they are, outliers. People who are outside the realm of acceptable political dialogue and then treated that way. And this is not new. I mean, we've seen this over the course of the history of this country. The most famous of those organizations, of course, is the Ku Klux Klan. And they were, ascendant in the 1920s. But over time and through good work by the FBI with state and local partners, they were essentially neutered. And that, I think, is what has to happen here as well.
And how disturbing is it to you that it seemed like the president and his allies were encouraging, for example, the people that shot protesters in Wisconsin, that it seems like Kyle Rittenhouse is now a martyr on the right in some circles? How disturbing is that to you?
Well, yeah, it's disturbing. And people need to understand that, especially, those in high offices, language matters, and nods that you give, or indications of approval that you let out, that those have tangible, very tangible impacts. And so I think that people have to be responsible and understand that you can't, say positive things about, somebody who shoots protesters. I mean, I understand we're a loud, noisy nation. I get that. That's one of the strengths of the United States. But there are limits to the ways in which we have to interact with one another.
So I want to ask about the main issue you're working on right now, which is gerrymandering. And you are one of the leading figures in the Democratic Party that is trying to do something about this problem, both in terms of trying to fight for fair maps and also try to elect Democrats who will pass fair maps. I think a lot of people don't know, even still, that the state legislatures that are elected in 2020 are going to be the ones in most states that draw new redistricting maps in 2021. You and I have had this conversation many times. This issue continually keeps getting overlooked, and it seems like it's massively overlooked right now. So I want to get your sense on, number one, what are you doing to try to combat gerrymandering? How is it going, and how can we get more attention to this issue 27 days before the election?
Well, we started the National Democratic Redistricting Committee back in January of 2017. And so for the last almost 4 years at this point, we have been working to try to do away with this problem of gerrymandering. And, the gerrymandering that occurred, in 2011, Princeton University said was the worst of the last half century. And so we have filed lawsuits. We have supported candidates who will stand, for fair redistricting. We have tried to put in place these commissions these nonpartisan, neutral commissions that would actually do the line drawing. And so we've been pretty successful in doing that. We put in place candidates who will stand for fair redistricting. We put governors in places, kind of unexpected places, Kansas, for instance, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. We've been successful in that regard. We've done well with regard to our support for state level candidates, people running for the state legislature. We've been successful in the lawsuits that we have brought, and we put in place these nonpartisan commissions in Michigan, Colorado, Missouri, Utah. And so we're in a much better place as a nation in 2020 than we were in 2010. And so I think we'll do pretty well in 2021. But the last part of the puzzle are the elections in 27 days. What happens to the Texas State House of Representatives? Critical election. What happens at the North Carolina legislative elections? Critical elections. Those are two big pieces of the puzzle. We have, I guess, 10 target states, but those are, I think, probably two of the biggest targets that we have. We want to have a situation where we have Democrats at the table, so that we don't have these Republican trifectas, but have Democrats at the table in so we control either one of the two houses in the state legislature, or you have the governor, and so that we can't have a repeat of what happened in 2011. And as I said, I think we're at a good place. We just need to close strong now with regard to what's going to happen in November.
So when people show up at the polls and they're excited to vote for the president, what you're telling them is make sure to vote down ballot. Don't forget to vote for your state legislative candidate, because those races are more important than ever this year, right?
Oh, that's absolutely right. They're vitally important now because it will affect the redistricting that's done in 2021, and that will decide, political power for the course of the next decade. But here's the deal, I understand how people are focusing on the presidential election. This is an existential presidential election. I get that. But what's going to happen down ballot is just as important, if not maybe more important. On a day-to-day basis, people are more impacted by their state representatives probably than they are by the president of the United States in terms of healthcare, criminal justice reform, something that we've been talking a lot about over the past few months, voter protection, a woman's right to choose. These are all things really decided at the state level, and the people who we will put in the state legislature decided, this November, will not only be responsible for the redistricting, but will also be responsible for the passage of laws that affect those areas. And so, yeah, I understand. Get to the polls, vote for, Joe Biden. I'm a Democrat, but go down ballot and make sure that you're casting a vote for who's running for your state legislature, who's running, if there are elections in your state, for the Supreme Court. These are all people who will have a role when it comes to the redistricting in 2021. But beyond that, will have an impact on your life through the course of the next decade.
You mentioned that one of your major targets is trying to flip the Texas House of Representatives, which I don't think Democrats have controlled since maybe 2002, 2003. Right. I'm sure you saw the news that Greg Abbott issued an order at the last minute limiting mail ballot drop-off sites to 1 per county. So there were going to be 12 drop-off sites in Harris County, Texas, which has 2.4 million registered voters. Now there's only 1 for a county that's larger than the state of Rhode Island that has more people than 26 states. Is that a sign of desperation on the part of Texas Republicans? Do they feel like they're going to lose, and so they're going to the nth degree to try to suppress votes as a result of that?
Yeah, I think it's a sign of desperation. I think it's a sign of fear. I actually think that they are afraid of the people who they say they want to represent. Now, you have to ask yourself, in the middle of a pandemic, when you're trying to minimize contact between people, you're trying to make voting as safe and healthy as is possible, why would you put just 1 drop box in Harris County, as you said, as large as the state of Rhode Island? 12 even sounds like it's probably not enough, but okay, that's fine. If you get to 12 and that's the number that everybody could agree on, okay, I can go with that. These are all these artificial things that they are doing to try to make it difficult for people to vote, trying to make people decide between staying healthy and casting a ballot, trying to suppress, depress the number of people who will actually come to the polls. And that really says a lot about the two parties. Democrats are fighting like hell to get as many people registered and voting as is possible. Republicans, by contrast, want to limit the number of people who vote, and then want to pick within that group who those people should actually be. This is that classic thing. They're trying to pick their voters instead of having voters choose who their representatives ought to be. And all of this is really an indication of some real serious deficiencies that we have in our democracy, a lot of which can be undone if we are successful in having a fair redistricting process and putting people who represent the will of the people into the state legislatures come next year. Because you got to understand, and people need to hear this, these unfair voting laws, unfair voting rules are regulations and laws that exist now. If you have good legislatures there, they can be undone. Just because they're there now doesn't mean they have to be there forever. And so you could roll back, unnecessary photo ID. You can roll back voter purging. You can roll back the closure of polling places, 1,700 of which since the Shelby County decision. This is not set in stone, and that's what's on the ballot come this November.
I'm sure you saw the article in The Atlantic that talked about the possibility of state legislatures actually appointing their own electors to the Electoral College, essentially nullifying the will of the voters in their states if there's some post-election dispute. What would it say if these heavily gerrymandered Republican state legislatures in Wisconsin or Pennsylvania or Michigan were to essentially override the will of their voters?
Well, that would be a direct attack on American democracy. And I don't think that the courts would allow that to happen. And I don't think the American people would allow that to occur. That would be as bald a power grab as we have ever seen in this nation. In fact, that would be unprecedented. And so those state legislators who are thinking about doing something along those lines need to understand that they're doing so, at their political peril. I mean, the American people will hold them responsible for that. I think the courts will hold them responsible for that. I think those efforts will ultimately not succeed. And then those who try to engage in it will have to explain to their constituents exactly what were you trying to do. We voted for, Joe Biden. We voted for, candidate B when it came to, some other office. And you tried to overturn the results of that election, and for partisan purposes, that would, I think, result in the end of a lot of political careers.
One of the things that also hasn't gotten a lot of attention is the importance of state Supreme Courts. We've seen, for example, rulings by the Wisconsin Supreme Court that have been very destructive to democracy and voting rights. And actually, what I've heard is that in states like Michigan and Ohio, it might be possible to flip the state Supreme Court. In Texas, I think there's a possibility of picking up a number of seats in the state Supreme Court. So are you working on that? And talk about why state courts are important, particularly because the Supreme Court in a recent gerrymandering decision basically said federal courts can't review partisan gerrymandering, but state courts still have the power to do so.
Well, that's exactly it. I mean, these state courts have always been important, but they become even more important given the wrongly decided Ruchko decision by the Supreme Court that said that you can't bring you can't bring partisan gerrymandering cases into the federal system. You can bring racial gerrymandering cases, but not partisan ones, which means that you now have to look to the state courts to try to put the brakes on legislatures that are going to gerrymander in a partisan way. And so, yeah, that's why we are involved in these Supreme Court elections in Ohio, in Michigan, as well as in Texas. We're going to have to, as we did in North Carolina, we have brought lawsuits successfully, challenging what Republicans did with regard to partisan gerrymandering. The state courts, applying their state constitutions, have said to the Republican legislatures, "You've gone too far. This violates the state legislature, and as a result, we're going to throw out these gerrymandered districts that you have drawn and have ordered new elections." So it's a way in which, by supporting justices at the Supreme Courts in these various states who will commit themselves not to deciding things on an ideological basis, a partisan basis, but just applying the law, applying those state constitutions, they can be a real check to make sure that the process is ultimately a fair one.
Let's talk about the national Supreme Court. Next week are confirmation hearings for Amy Coney Barrett. How should Democrats approach this?
Well, I think they should be respectful of her. I think they should be direct and be frank in their questioning of her. Don't fall into the trap about trying to question her faith. Question her positions. I respect her strong faith, and that's great. I applaud that. But the positions that she has taken, the positions that she has written about, query her about those things, so the American people understand, what kind of justice she would be. On the basis of the writings that I have seen, it seems to me she is a pretty ideological person who would put at risk Roe versus Wade, who would put at risk the Affordable Care Act. And so there are, everything from a woman's right to choose to protecting people with pre-existing conditions is really wrapped up in this confirmation hearing. So I think at a minimum, the hearings ought to be used for people to understand what it is that Mitch McConnell and Trump are trying to do here. And it's possible that you could convince, some Republicans who are potentially, who are on the ballot to do something, that I would consider appropriate and not vote for her confirmation.
So a 5-4 conservative majority on the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act, allowed extreme voter purging, said that partisan gerrymandering couldn't be reviewed. I mean, there were already a whole series of bad decisions when it came to voting and democracy from the Roberts Court. How bad would a 6-3 court be on voting rights? I mean, it's almost incomprehensible to me that this is happening, but it would seem like it's going to be extremely destructive for democracy.
Yeah, I worry about what a 6-3 court, as it would be configured, what that would mean for civil liberties, for our democracy, for economic decisions. There's a whole range of things that I think would be put at risk. At this point, Chief Justice Roberts is the swing vote, and that's an indication of how I think seriously adrift the court has become. I mean, he's a person who's very hostile to electoral cases, and has been so since he was a young lawyer at the Justice Department. But to have a 6-3 court and have a court configured that way for the next 20, 30 years or so is something that I would consider extremely problematic. So that's why this confirmation hearing is really something that the American people need to pay attention to, and to the extent that they are concerned about this particular justice or concerned about what her elevation to the court might mean, their voices need to be heard.
If Barrett is confirmed, how seriously do you think Dems should take the possibility of increasing the size of the Supreme Court?
I think that's definitely something that should be considered. When you think that, we're hearing now Republicans saying, well, Democrats want to pack the court. Well, here's the deal. With regard to Merrick Garland and not giving him a hearing back in 2016, the Republicans, led by Mitch McConnell, they packed the court. They manipulated the court. They, fooled around with the way in which the court was configured. And what would have been a 5-4 liberal court from 2016 until now, until the death of Justice Ginsburg, was prevented from coming into existence, which might have meant a fundamentally different decision when it came to that partisan gerrymandering case that I think the Supreme Court wrongly decided. There's a whole range of other cases. And so I think, Democrats need to seriously think about the way in which the court was made to be 6-3. First, it was, with Merrick Garland. Now we have a confirmation hearing, not before an election. This is while an election is going on. People have already started to vote, and now we're going to confirm another justice to the Supreme Court. And so I think serious consideration has got to be given by Democrats to potentially expanding the court. Because you understand something, the move to go to 6-3 in the way McConnell has done it is not about principle. It has nothing to do with when it happened last year of a presidential term. This is all about the exercise of power. This is about the raw exercise of power. And if Democrats get the power that they could get by having the presidency, by having the Senate, by maintaining the House of Representatives, I think that power has to be used in an appropriate way to deal with the wrongs that the Republicans did with the use of the power that they had.
Why can't Joe Biden and Kamala Harris just say what you just said? Why can't this be their answer when they're asked that question? She pretty much dodged the question last night when asked it in the debate.
Well, I'm sure this is something that maybe they're trying to work through. I'm speaking for myself. This is based on my observations and my strong feelings that a sense of fairness should guide Democrats as we consider, what potentially to do come January. And maybe they're still in the process of trying to determine, how they want to react. I don't fault them, for that. The question will ultimately be, I'm not awfully concerned about what they think in October. I'm more concerned about what it is that Democrats are going to do come January and February of next year.
Another thing that the Trump administration and Mitch McConnell have done is appoint 218 judges to the federal courts, so to the Court of Appeals and the lower courts. They haven't appointed a single African-American to the federal appeals court, which is pretty astonishing. Do you think that the lower courts should also potentially be enlarged to ensure more representation if Democrats take over?
Yeah, I think that ought to be part of a kind of a review of the courts and a court reform effort. Look at those jurisdictions, those districts, those courts of appeals, what their workloads look like. There may be places where additional judges should go. 218 judges is a lot. That would be, it's almost what you would expect a two-term president to do. Studies basically show that over the course of a couple of terms, a single president appoints about a third of the federal bench, and so what they've done is really kind of compress this into to one term. And so if Democrats can win and then win the next election, you can pretty much counter what the Republicans have done through the course of the Trump presidency. But I also think that some serious questions need to be raised about expanding the courts in any case, because I think you probably make an empirical case, regardless of how whether or not you're responding to what McConnell has done. I think you can probably make an empirical case that you should expand the federal district courts, especially, as well as the courts of appeal.
How concerned are you about a Bush v. Gore 2.0 scenario, where the election is close in one or two or more states, litigation is filed by the Trump campaign seeking to throw out ballots, it goes before the Supreme Court, and a Supreme Court potentially with Amy Coney Barrett on it rules in favor of the Trump campaign, throws out ballots, and essentially installs Donald Trump for a second term?
I'd like to think that Bush v. Gore is a once-in-a-lifetime thing. I'd hate to have to go through that again. But yeah, that's one of those nightmare scenarios where, for whatever reason, there are disputes that occur on election day or the days after the election, and somehow, some way, the resolution of the election finds its way to the Supreme Court. I mean, I'd hate to have that happen again. I'd want to have whoever takes office come January the 20th, and I hope that it's going to be Joe Biden, that person would be there. People would acknowledge that the election was fair. It was not decided by the courts. It was decided by the people, waiting in line and casting ballots, voting early, doing all those things. So my hope is that it doesn't happen. If it does, it'll call into question, the legitimacy of a second Trump term, if the only way he gets there is because the Supreme Court that that he packed, that he and Mitch McConnell packed, decided in his favor.
So people have a lot of questions about how to vote in this election. What's your advice to people when it comes to how they should vote, and how much confidence do you have in vote by mail?
Yeah, I'd say it's kind of as an umbrella. I'd say everybody needs to have a plan. This isn't given all that's going to be thrown at you in terms of making it difficult for certain of us to vote. We need to have a plan. This is not just decide on, November the 3rd, I'm going to go down and vote. No. This is beginning, middle of October. You need to right now be thinking about how is it that you're going to vote. And so I think that, you need to vote early. If you're going to use the mails, get it in the mail as soon as you can. If you're going to vote in person and you have the ability to vote, early, use those early days to cast a ballot. We want, we talk about flattening the curve when it comes to the virus, so we don't overwhelm the, our healthcare system. I think we need to flatten the curve when it comes to voting. Do it as early as we can so that we don't overcome our electoral system. And I've got faith in the ability of people to cast a ballot fairly. And have it counted if they use the mails. But if you use the mails, and given Supreme Court decisions about when they have to be postmarked, and the problems that this guy DeJoy, the Postmaster General, has done with regard to restricting overtime and pulling machines out, we have to factor that into the calculation. So if you're going to vote by mail, vote early. If you can drop it off at one of those boxes, I would urge you to do that.
What do you think people's expectation should be on election night? And how much do we have to educate people about the fact that we might not know the winner of the election on election night, and there's nothing actually wrong with that?
Boy, Ari, I think that is really, really important. I mean, I think that's really important. People need to be sensitized to the possibility that come, the night of November the 3rd, we might not know who the president is. And you know what? That's okay. We've had elections like that at the state level, the federal level, at the presidential level before. It was only in 2000 that we didn't know who the president was going to be for 20 days, 25 days, something like that, after the election occurred. And we had to have the Supreme Court make that ruling with regard to the count in Florida. So people need to understand that, it would be a good thing to know on the night of November the 3rd, what happened. And we got, people at boards on television explaining what happened in precincts in Michigan and Wisconsin and all that stuff, but that might not happen. And, we just need to be patient. The most important thing is to get this right. So give the systems in the states the time to do a fair and accurate count of the votes. And then on that basis, let's decide who the next president of the United States should be. But the media, I think, has an important role to play in this by talking about, the possibility that we might not know on November the 3rd, and that's not out of the normal. It's before we had all this electronic stuff. People didn't know back in the early part of the 20th century. A lot of people didn't know, who the president was. The election in 1960, we didn't know until the next day. Between Kennedy and Nixon. So there's a lot of instances where we don't know the night of, and if this takes a couple of days, 3 days, 4 days, that's fine. Everything's going to be fine. Everybody just be calm and let's focus on getting it right. Let's make sure that we have an accurate and full count.
How do you think you yourself are going to be spending election night, and how are you campaigning right now? I knew you were a really popular surrogate on the campaign trail, and now you can't go on the campaign trail. So how are you trying to get the message out, and then where are you going to be November 3rd?
November 3rd, I'll be at home. I think. I don't think I'll be any place other than that. I mean, it may be that I'll be called on to do something in connection with the monitoring that the Biden campaign is going to be doing. I hope I'll just be at home like everybody else, just watching the returns. The campaigning that I had planned to do. We had a great schedule of trips to a whole variety of states. All got pulled down because of the pandemic, and now I'm doing everything virtually. And it's. I don't think, in some ways, I think people are becoming more accustomed to it, and I think it becomes, as a result, maybe effective. But it's still something that I'm getting used to. Although it gives me the ability, I'm doing something with you here today. I've done something in Pennsylvania already. I'm going to be doing something later on in Georgia. I can hit a whole bunch of different parts of the country virtually in a way that you could not do if you were doing it physically.
What do you think the 1 to 2 most important things everyday citizens can do right now? I get this question all the time. What can I do to be involved? Yeah. What's your answer to that?
Well, I think on a personal level, as I said before, make a plan so that you can make sure that your vote is going to be counted, that there aren't going to be any problems with your casting a ballot. I think also people need to think about maybe volunteering to be poll workers. We typically, the people who are at the polls are senior citizens, people who are up in age. Those are not necessarily the people we want to have in the middle of a pandemic working as poll workers. So maybe younger people who are in good health could volunteer to be poll workers, making sure that those polling stations where you might be located are safe. Have the necessary equipment, the plexiglass and all of that stuff. So that's one way. And then looking for organizations that are engaged in protecting the vote. All on the line, which is a part of of the NDRC umbrella of organizations. All on the Line is our advocacy organization, and we are really involved in voter protection efforts. We're obviously fighting gerrymandering as well. So, go online and look at what All on the Line is doing in your state and potentially volunteer to work with us.
How are you staying sane right now in these dark days? And what is making you hopeful about the future?
Well, I think I stay sane by working. If you don't work, if you don't focus on trying to make things better and keeping things fair, if you just kind of, watch television and rant and rave at CNN, MSNBC, Fox, that's not a path to sanity. So working is what keeps me sane. But what keeps me hopeful is history. We have faced trying times before when it has come to elections. As I said, we've conducted good elections, legitimate elections in pandemics, through wars, through civil strife. I think we can do it again this year. This nation is better now than it was 50 years before, and better than it was 50 years before that. There's an arc that this nation, I think, is on in terms of progress. It's not a straight line. I mean, we have periods in which things with that arc of progress, hits bumps and gets deterred. But I think ultimately, I've got faith in the American people that they're going to make the right decision, that they're going to take this seriously. I'm really heartened, for instance, by on the first day of early voting. I've seen it in Virginia. I've seen it in Ohio. Huge lines of people. Think about that. On the first day of early voting, you got maybe another 20, 30 days in which to vote. And the logical response in some way to say, well, there's a long line, I'll come back the next day. And people stayed in line. So people stayed in line to vote on the first day of early voting. And that, I think, is reflective of the desire, the intensity of the feeling that people have about this election. And I think, a focused, intense American people are going to do the right thing, that they'll vote for people who they think will change the direction of this country. I just hope that they will focus not only on the presidency, but focus on those down ballot races as well. And if they do that, I think this country is going to will be just fine.
Mr. Attorney General, it's so great to talk to you again. I love being able to see you every few months, even if it's virtually. And I'm hoping in January or February of 2021, we can have another conversation about how to fix all of the problems that we've been talking about, not relive them. So thank you for all you're doing. Stay safe, be well. Thank you for social distancing. Thank you for wearing a mask. Thank you for setting an example.
All right. It's good to see you, Ari.
And thank you so much to all our listeners for tuning in on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube. I'm Ari Berman, a voting rights reporter for Mother Jones, and you can find much more of our coverage about fighting to protect the right to vote at motherjones.com. Thank you, everyone, and be well.